In this episode of the Smart City podcast, I had a really fascinating conversation with the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the US Army Strategic Integration, Mr. Richard Kidd. Richard tells us about how smart cities and the smart city concept is being utilised in the Army across the US, and also the sheer scale of the Army's installation footprint. For those Aussie listeners, this is about 1.5 times the area of southeast Queensland. He also gives us an overview of his presentation at the IEEE Green Tech Conference and how the Army is pioneering with smart technology. This includes the connected soldier, autonomous vehicles and building management, amongst many, many other things. He also talks about changing our focus from fixed sensors to moving ones that are already available, and importantly, always keeping privacy and security front of mind. This was a really interesting conversation, so as always, I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
It's the Smart City Podcast, whoa, with Smart City experts, here we go. Connecting smart technology, both big and small. Smart cities are making life better for all. Big data, emerging trends, self-driving cars and more. The Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.
Good morning, Richard. How are you today?
Good morning, Zoe. I'm good. I've got a cup of coffee and I'm starting my day.
That sounds awesome. Well, I've just got a cup of tea and I'm ending my day. So, I think it's perfect that we're doing the opposite things at the opposite sides of the world.
Well, it's always great to talk to an Australian. We'll get a little bit more into my background, but I had the privilege of just serving alongside some great Australians in the United Nations and the nonprofit community, relief workers. So you guys seem to produce a tremendously gifted set of public and international civil servants. So I compliment your country on that.
Oh wow, thank you. I'll take that. That's really nice to hear. And we've just celebrated, Anzac Day or our Remembrance Day just yesterday. So it's a really kind of prudent time to be talking to you.
Well, I'm based in the Pentagon, and we actually have an Anzac corridor that commemorates all of that Allied cooperation. And there was a little ceremony in that corridor today. It's like a museum in the Pentagon. And I often walk through it on my way back to my car in the evening.
Yeah, very nice. Okay, well, let's just jump straight into this. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you're passionate about?
Sure. So I'm really passionate about sustainability, and I got to that place through sort of an interesting and circuitous route. But I served in the Army as a young man in uniform, and then I served in the United Nations as a civilian, where I worked logistics in refugee camps, and I became very interested in issues of sort of how you construct an environment where people live that can be energy efficient, sustainable, secure, and can provide a variety of public services, public goods and services, not just so I started in the refugee camp, but that sort of migrated through my time in the federal government. And after the events of 9/11, I returned to this government where I've served in the State Department, the Department of Energy, the Army, the White House, and now back to the Army. And over time, the storyline has been energy, sustainability, infrastructure, and now sort of smart cities.
Yeah, cool. So what does a smart city kind of look like to you?
Sure. So for the Army, we need to put this in the context of the Army. It's a smart installation. And installation is where the Army does a lot of things, but there's also some similarities with what would be a civilian city. So when we look to the future of our Army installations, we want them to be connected, clean, vibrant, efficient, digital. But we also want them to be secure, because the fact is, sort of, recognized in the recent National Defense Strategy, is America's homeland is no longer a sanctuary. And through cyber attacks and information warfare and unconventional warfare, the cities where our Army and our Army's families and civilians and retirees live, work, and play are targets. So we have to think about not only making sure we have a smart city environment, but we also have to have a secure environment.
Yeah, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about the sheer scale of the footprint of the Army cities that you are dealing with, and how that smart city concept kind of came to be thought about in those cities?
Sure. So the United States Army is a big organization. We have 156 installations, and when I say installations, these can vary in size from fairly small to pretty large. So our largest installations have about 200,000 people coming to them or living on them each day. So a couple of medium-sized cities. The total land across these Army installations is equal to the size of our state of Maryland. I should have done some sort of research and calculated that into Australian terms, but Maryland's a medium-sized state in the U.S., so it's as big as a U.S. state. We have over 5,000 historic sites across those installations. Some of them are Native American historic sites or battlefield sites from our Civil War. And we have over 400 endangered or protected species, about 200,000 buildings, 1 billion square feet. So it's a big operation, and it's spread out across a variety of climate zones and areas across the great country of the United States. So, how did we come to the smart city concept? I think it's just a growing recognition that the way cities, just like everything else, information technology is converging with operational technology, with the physical environment, and this recognition that everything is going to be going to have sensors and instruments and data, and that using this can improve city operations as well as the quality of life for our soldiers and their families. But at the same time, every one of those technological advances has a downside. In fact, it could be a vector of cyber attack from a hostile nation or from a hacker group or an espionage, a foreign enemy espionage, these type of things. So we want all of the great things that are happening out there in smart cities across the world, but we want to make sure that they don't come with vulnerabilities that can be exploited.
Yeah, definitely. I think that security and privacy aspect is really important, and particularly for the Army, as well as just regular old civilians. So my next question is, and I think you've answered this pretty much already, but why do you think the smart cities movement or concept is so important for the Army?
Yeah. So for the same reasons I mentioned earlier, and the same motivations that you find in the private sector, more tailored, efficient delivery of public goods and services, a safer community, provision of information, communications, cleanliness, energy security. These are all aspects of a smart city. Another thing, though, that's important for the Army is, the U.S. Army is a volunteer Army, and we draw from the population writ large. So we have to think not what the Army needs today, but about the future. And as we recruit soldiers and these young men and women make a decision to come into the Army, they're going to take a look, and if they're used to a certain level of public goods and services delivered efficiently, online, and proactively tailored to their needs, they're going to expect the same thing in the Army. No one who grows up in a smart city is going to want to live on a dumb installation. So part of this is just recognizing that we have to create an environment that is attractive to those who are considering joining the military. So it's an issue of recruiting and retention.
Yeah, I really like that I've never really thought about it like that before. So that makes a lot of sense, attracting and keeping the people there because they'll be used to that smart city concept. That's really interesting. So can you tell us a little bit about your presentation that you gave at the IEEE Green Tech Conference?
Oh, sure. So that was a great conference, and my presentation, I basically outlined sort of the three imperatives that were driving the Army's look at smart installations. The first imperative is frankly the changing technology of war. So many of our installations today are connected 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with Army units that are in combat. They control, maneuver, they provide intelligence fusion, communications, and also as the United States has rolled back our forward presence overseas, we often deploy directly from the United States to an area of potential conflict or where our forces are needed. So we have this changing mission in our installations. Okay, the U.S. Army no longer has 200,000 troops in Europe. Okay, so our installations are in many ways part of the fight. So that's imperative one. Imperative two is that our adversaries have now taken away the safety of the United States. So for much of the United States' history, our two great oceans have protected us from adversaries or would-be adversaries. And so, but that's changed because of cyber warfare, information warfare, false news, even unconventional warfare, or weapons like a drone, a hobby drone equipped with an explosives can be a threat to our installations. So there's this growing recognition that we have to have a different security posture around our installations. And then the third imperative is one I've talked about the most so far, is that, of course, the civilian expectation of how cities deliver public goods and services has changed. And there's this tremendous opportunity to manage our infrastructure and our real estate more efficiently and effectively for the benefit of all. So those are the three imperatives that are changing the way the Army looks at installations. And the solutions, while we can talk a little bit more about specific technologies, but at the end of the day, it's a secure data network. That's a secure data architecture that provides a backbone to collect data from disparate sensors all around the installation, bring those together into a data lake, and then we using artificial intelligence and decision support tools to improve installation performance across a whole range of goods and services, whether it's security or energy, cleanliness, traffic, these type of things. So it's that those are the three imperatives that are changing the way we look at cities. Mm-hmm. And while there's lots of technologies, the backbone is based on the foundation of secure data transfer.
Yeah, cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the technologies that you've been exploring for the use in the U.S. Army.
Sure. So, right now the Army has a pretty strong track record in the energy space. Mm-hmm. We have a very large portfolio of both renewable and conventional power generation on our installations, but that is increasingly connected to microgrids to provide sort of energy resilience on our installations. So Fort Drum, New York has a biomass plant, and it can operate completely island from the rest of the grid. So if the grid goes down, that installation at Fort Drum, and for your listeners, that's where our 10th Mountain Division is, 10th Mountain Infantry Division. It's the most, in terms of rotations, it's been the most deployed division in the U.S. Army. Mm-hmm. So that's very secure. In Hawaii, next month, we're going to open a plant. It's a tri-fuel plant. It can use either biofuel, regular diesel, or natural gas. And this is in concert with the local utility. And what's interesting about Hawaii is that most of the energy plants are right on the shoreline where a tsunami could damage them. This plant was a partnership between the Army, the state, and the local utility. The plant is at a high altitude. It serves the civilian grid most of the day. It can be a peaker plant to pair with renewables. It can provide baseload power. If the load is high enough, it can restart the grid if the grid goes down. But in the event of emergency, it's connected by a cyber secure microgrid to the Army installation in Hawaii, Schofield Barracks, to the Army Airfield, Wheeler Army Airfield, and to a civilian hospital. So it sort of creates this platform of resilience inside the island of Oahu in the state of Hawaii. If we look to the deep future, or not so much the deep future, but sort of the intermediate future, we envision a connected soldier, where a soldier, so the Army is actually a big investor in smart fabrics. Believe it or not, the Army, U.S. Army, in concert with MIT, owns the patent for the thinnest photovoltaic collection device in the world. It's a piece of thread that can be woven into the fabric of a uniform to create power. So we're looking to a future where you have a connected soldier, so that we understand the biometrics and the performance of our soldiers. That's to a connected installation, and that's part of a connected Army enterprise. And a little bit of an example of how that might work is, so, soldiers all over the world, they take their physical fitness test, they go to the range, they have, they do marksmanship training, they have driver training, they have their biometrics, height, weight, strength. So all of this is recorded and then, or will be recorded and then used for a tailored nutrition and fitness regime for the soldiers. But then we're building virtual reality training centers, and our soldiers will go into the VR training or synthetic training environment. And unlike my teenage son, they won't go in as a 20th level ninja warrior into whatever sort of game space. They'll go in with their real human attributes that have been demonstrated on the training field or on the range. And then those scores will be aggregated at the unit level, and then the Army will know the readiness of units and how effective they could be based on, cascading information all the way up from the soldier's individual fitness to how the unit performs in synthetic training. So the intent is a connected soldier to a connected installation to a connected Army enterprise.
Yeah, wow, that's really, really interesting, and really, I guess, the way to go in this space. And yeah, it'll be really interesting to see how that kind of pans out. Do you plan, or do you already pilot specific technologies before going to full implementation normally?
So, the United States military has a record of actually, bringing technologies, being early adopters of technologies when those technologies are in the military's interest. So everything from, Teflon dental floss and other things have come out of the internet, GPS, things that we take for granted have spun out of sort of military research or technologies. But yes, so we do have a number of pilot technologies. We've been looking at a fair amount of work on autonomous vehicles. And so you'd say, well, why would the Army work on autonomous vehicles? Well, we're working at it from two ways. Sort of in the combat environment, if we can do convoys where they're all autonomous, or where there's fewer people, say a follow the leader type level of autonomy, then we have fewer soldiers exposed to hazard on the battlefield, and the convoys can actually move faster, save fuel, these types of things. But on our installations, if a soldier comes back and they've been injured or wounded overseas or in combat or in training, they have to get around. They have their wounded warrior and they need that transportation service. So what we've pioneered on a number of installations is autonomous, easy access vehicles where a wounded warrior, perhaps in a wheelchair, can call the vehicle, meet that vehicle, and then that vehicle can take him or her to their medical appointments or to their physical therapy or shopping or other types of things. So it returns mobility to a soldier. And at the same time, in the past, we may have done this with a driver. Now that driver can be returned to their unit to do their primary function. So we're experimenting with autonomous vehicles. We're experimenting with some integrated building management systems where we bring the building management control systems together into like a command center for an installation. A variety of sustainability technologies have either come out of Army efforts, past Army efforts. I'm not sure if a ground source heat is a technology that's used in Australia, but first widespread use of ground source heat pumps was in the United States Army in the southern United States. We have over 60,000 homes with solar panels on the roof. We have a variety of sustainable sort of technologies, permeable pavers, water management, green buildings, although we don't normally use that term of green buildings, but high performance buildings. So the Army has a very large portfolio. In fact, the largest single owner of high performance buildings in the United States is the U.S. Army.
Yeah, wow. So with all this, do you think that collaboration is really a key part to integrating the smart city concept?
Oh, absolutely. So for the Army, some of our installations are in the middle of nowhere, but most of our installations are next to a civilian community. So they share a power grid, they share a water distribution system, they may share emergency services such as police, fire, hospitals. So, and it's also in those communities a lot of our service members live, and it's those communities that we recruit from, or where our retirees live. So we have to have a strong collaboration with the local communities. We also have to have a strong collaboration with academia, of course, and with the private sector. Those engineering and design firms, technology manufacturers, the big IT companies in Silicon Valley. All of these are would-be partners for the Army and are part of the smart cities movement. So we're integrated with that, and of course we see lots of value in collaboration.
Yeah, cool. So do you think that I'll leave it broad, but do you think that America can become leaders in the smart city space?
I would hazard to suggest what country can or can't become a leader. In your part of the world, I think Singapore is often held up as an example of one of the best leading edge smart cities, as is Bangkok, Hanoi. Others have some pretty significant programs in place. So, I wouldn't predict one way or the other where America is going to lead, but I think America is going to be part of this movement. I think the Army is going to be part of America's efforts in this area.
Yeah, awesome. So, do you know of any emerging trends that people aren't talking about at the moment? Things that aren't widely spoken about that maybe the Army is looking at?
Well, I think I gave you one already. The notion of the connected soldier. A city, amazing story about a smart city application, not in the Army, but as a city in America, Louisville, gave GPS or enabled inhalers, airway inhalers to people that suffer from respiratory illness. And then they were able to track where and how often those inhalers were used. And from that, they were able to plot poor air quality in the city, and they were able to take corrective measures. And in this case, they realized that the inhalers were being used the most in those part of the cities where there was no green space. So by introducing green space and trees and islands in the middle of the roads, they were able to improve the air quality. Now, I say that because in smart cities, we often talk about sensors. We talk about sensors in the building. We talk about sensors on on a lamppost or street light. We talk about sensors in the roadways. We don't realize, though, that right now, today, everybody, at least in the developed world, is a sensor platform. The smartphone that you carry is a sensing device. And so there's recognition that the sensors in our cities can be also if you have a vehicle that's newer than 5 years, it's computer controlled and it is a sensor. Okay. In the vehicles, in America, new vehicles tires are filled with nitrogen, and they have a green plug on the tire, and that shows it's filled with nitrogen. And that tire has a tire pressure sensor built right into it. And every tire, every wheel has its own sensor. So that car is a moving sensor platform. The phone on the individual is a moving sensor platform. So how can we use those sensors in a way that protects and guards privacy to help inform decisions? Whether they're instantaneous decisions in case of, like, say, an emergency. Suddenly, if every phone in a couple of blocks starts sending out text messages about a traffic accident or a violent crime, that is an immediate sensor. But perhaps more importantly, if the tires in the car car after car after car, it slows down and goes bumpity bump at a certain intersection. Well, maybe that's where you need to send out a road repair crew. So I think that the notion of sensors as being fixed to a permanent object is going to be replaced with this notion of movable sensors on our cars and on the people that occupy our towns and cities.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's a really good way to think about it, that, we talk about installing all these sensors, but we've got them already. We just need to utilize them in a connected, integrated way. So, and I really, that the air pollution, connecting that to, inhaler, that's really interesting as well. Well, it's been so great to talk to you. I've learnt so much, and it's really interesting to hear about what the Army's doing, or the US Army's doing, particularly the connected soldier and the installations, and such a wide footprint that you do have. So it makes sense that you're going to be operating in the smart city space for sure. So I just have one last question,
Sure.
Which is how can people connect with you?
Sure. So, well, we'll follow up. I have an Army email account and I have a LinkedIn account. But the Army, the organization I work for, we have a Army website and an Army installations website with some more information about some of our projects that are out there and are available. For an Australian audience, I missed one technology. If you'll give me a slight alibi.
Sure.
We in the Army have been one of the pioneer first users of a technology called cross-laminate timber construction, and we actually did this with an Australian company as our partner. So we privatized a lot of our housing and our hotels, and so we built the largest then was the largest hotel and cross-laminate timber building in America in Huntsville, Alabama, and we're now. It's no longer the largest, but we're now building 6 hotels using cross-laminate timber technology. For those of you who are in the sustainability space, this is a technology that has a low to negative carbon content. It's easier to build, and it returns sort of manufacturing jobs to, in this case, to the United States. But Australia has been a pioneer in this technology, and we've been shamelessly copied your good work. So. To you and to all the colleagues in Australia, thanks for bringing CLT back to America.
Awesome. No, thanks very much for adding that. I mean, I can't take any credit, but I will by association, being Australian.
Well, Zoe, thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to you today. I appreciate it. I hope we were able to answer your questions.
Yeah,
and if you have any follow-ups, you can get back through our public affairs folks, and we'll answer what we can.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And yeah, I'll put all the links and everything in the show notes. We'll follow up afterwards so people can click away and check out some of the really cool stuff that you're doing. So yeah, thanks again for talking with me. And we'll talk again soon.
All right. Well, Zoe, you have a good night. And I'm off to work for a full day.
Okay. Enjoy.
It's the Smart City Podcast. Whoa.
Thanks so much for listening to the Smart City Podcast. Show notes for this episode and all other episodes can be found at thesmartcitypodcast.com. If you have any questions or comments for me or any of my guests, connect with me via email, zoe@thesmartcitypodcast.com, or via the socials. I'm on Twitter and Facebook @SmartCityPod. As always, I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed making it.
Smart City Podcast is what you're looking for.